So, picture a really high-stakes scenario for a second. You are looking at a founder who has spent, maybe the last 8 months operating in this state of absolute paranoid secrecy.
Right, the classic darkroom phase.
Exactly. They have literally locked themselves in a dark room. They've severed ties with their social circle, and they've just written, I mean, tens of thousands of lines of code.
Completely isolating.
Completely. And they are completely fueled by this unshakable conviction that their idea is revolutionary. They are certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they are about to change the world.
It's a very intoxicating feeling, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. So finally, launch day arrives. They execute this massive, perfectly coordinated public relations blitz on, a major tech blog. And at first, it actually looks like a triumph.
The initial spike.
Yeah, the spike. Thousands of users flood the site within the first few hours. The traffic spikes so hard the servers actually strain. The analytics dashboard is just glowing green.
They're popping champagne in the office.
Right, the champagne is popped. They feel like they have entirely made it. But then day 2 arrives, and the incoming traffic just sort of slows to a trickle.
And by day 3.
By day 3, it is absolute deafening silence. The users have completely vanished. The server is essentially empty. That founder, despite all those months of agonizing labor, they haven't actually built a business. They have just built the ultimate leaky bucket.
It is, it's a devastating sequence of events to witness, and yet what is truly chilling about this is that it's the default trajectory for the vast majority of new ventures globally.
It's the rule, not the exception.
Exactly. There is this immense, incredibly dangerous tension between the cinematic mythology of the overnight success, the story we are constantly sold by the media, and the brutal, unforgiving mathematical reality of actually building a functional product.
Because when the server goes quiet, it's not a glitch.
No, rarely. When that server goes quiet on day 3, it is very rarely a failure of the technology. The code usually works perfectly fine. It is almost always a failure of human psychology. It's a profound lack of empathy and a catastrophic error in foundational structural design.
And that tension, that exact point of failure, is exactly why we are here with you today. We are setting out on a very specific, highly targeted mission for this deep dive.
Very necessary one.
We are taking a deep dive into a single, incredibly dense masterclass. We're analyzing Lecture 4 from Y Combinator's startup curriculum, which was delivered by Adora Chung, the founder of the platform HomeJoy.
It's a foundational text, really.
It is, and our objective today is to entirely strip away the glamorous Silicon Valley mythology of exponential startup growth. We are going to explore the grueling, unglamorous, highly manual, and deeply psychological reality of taking a product from absolutely zero users to a state of sustainable long-term scale.
Right. We're unpacking the real mechanics.
We're unpacking the mechanics of product building, the intricacies of user psychology, and the absolute brutal math of survival.
And to truly understand those mechanics, how to grow a system, we first have to examine the lethal structural mistakes that founders make before they even write a single line of code.
Before the darkroom?
Exactly. The architecture of a company's failure is almost always drafted long before their product ever reaches the open market. And it begins at the most fundamental level, which is how a founder understands and allocates their most finite, non-renewable resource.
Which is their time.
Which is their time, yes.
And the source material focuses heavily on this concept of compressed time. It points out a fascinating psychological trap regarding how founders, or really anyone trying to build something complex, how they attempt to work in those earliest stages.
The part-time illusion.
Right. There is this pervasive idea, especially for people who are, juggling university or a full-time corporate job, that you can simply chip away at your revolutionary new startup for an hour or two every evening.
You put the kids to bed, you open the laptop, and you grind for 2 hours.
Exactly. But Chung vehemently argues against this approach. She argues that working 1 or 2 full, completely uninterrupted days is infinitely more valuable than working 2 hours a day spread out across the entire week, even if the total hours are roughly the exact same.
And the reason for this is a massive hidden penalty that we call the cost of context switching.
Right. Tell us about that penalty.
Well, context switching is a severe cognitive tax, and it is incredibly expensive to pay. When you are attempting to solve a highly complex, multi-dimensional problem, which is, let's be honest, what starting a new company or designing a new system fundamentally is, you have to load an immense amount of disparate information into your brain's working memory.
So it's like a computer's RAM.
Exactly like RAM. You are holding the hypothetical user profile, the macroeconomic market dynamics, the technical software architecture, the specific coding syntax, and your strategic market positioning. You're holding all of that in your mind simultaneously.
So let's walk through what actually happens to you in that 2-hour window. You sit down at, say, 8 p.m.
Right. You sit down at 8 p.m., and for the first 45 minutes, you aren't actually solving the problem.
You're just booting up.
You're just booting up. You are simply retrieving all of those complex variables from your long-term memory and loading them back into your active working memory. You are rereading your notes, you're remembering where you left off in the code, and you're trying to reconstruct the mental model of your business.
And that takes time.
It takes a lot of time. By the time you have successfully loaded all of that context into your brain and reached a state of deep, productive focus, an hour has already passed.
Wow.
So you work efficiently for perhaps 45 minutes, and then your 2-hour window is up. You have to shut it all down, purge it from your working memory, return to your day job the next morning, and then pay that exact same exhausting cognitive tax all over again the next night.
So you are constantly paying the toll, but you are never actually driving on the highway.
That is a perfect way to put it. You're just paying tolls. A full, uninterrupted day, what Chung calls compressed time, allows you to pay that cognitive tax exactly once.
Just once.
Just once. Once the context is loaded into your working memory, you can spend the next 12 hours operating in a state of deep, immersive flow. That uninterrupted state is mathematically the only environment where you can actually generate the novel, high-level solutions required to build something out of nothing.
Which leads directly into what the source material identifies as the novice approach. Because, if you don't have that compressed time, you inevitably fall into this trap. And it is a lethal trap.
It really is.
It's this instinct to build your product in total paranoid secrecy. It is the desire to orchestrate a flashy launch, maybe a PR stunt, and to expect sustained organic user growth without ever having gathered a single solitary piece of real-world feedback from a living human being.
Pure assumption.
It is the ultimate hubris, right? Assuming that your unvalidated hypothesis is a guaranteed objective fact.
Well, it is entirely an illusion of control. The novice founder desperately wants to build in a vacuum because the vacuum is safe.
Right. Nobody can tell you you're wrong in a vacuum.
Exactly. In the vacuum of your own apartment, the code always compiles perfectly. The financial projections always show exponential profit. And the imaginary users always behave exactly as you predict they will.
But real users are not theoretical models.
No, they are not. Real users are messy. They're unpredictable, they're emotional, and they are highly critical. Launching a completely secret product via a massive PR stunt is essentially an attempt to cheat the system.
It's a shortcut.
It's an attempt to bypass the grueling, humiliating work of real market validation.
And that's exactly what creates the scenario we opened with. The PR stunt creates a temporary spike in traffic, but that spike is a vanity metric.
A total illusion.
It quickly collapses into silence by day 3 because the product was meticulously designed for an imaginary, idealized demographic, not a real one with actual complex problems.
The product shatters the moment it makes contact with reality.
So if the novice approach is the poison, the source material offers a very specific, highly uncomfortable antidote, and that is extreme industry immersion. Founders must literally become a cog in the industry they want to disrupt.
They have to get their hands dirty, literally.
Literally. Adore Chung didn't just sit behind a MacBook in a coffee shop to build HomeJoy, which, was a platform meant to revolutionize the home cleaning industry. She didn't just read industry reports. She literally went out, got hired, and worked at a professional cleaning company herself.
She did the work.
She physically scrubbed floors, she cleaned toilets, and she hauled supplies up flights of stairs, all to find what she calls the golden nuggets of operational insight.
And that level of visceral physical immersion is the only valid way to transition your brain from abstract academic theory to physical reality. She understood a fundamental law of systems engineering,
Which is,
you cannot optimize a system from the outside. By becoming a cog in the existing machine, she wasn't just observing the manual labor. She was experiencing the structural inefficiencies firsthand. She was physically feeling the friction that her software would eventually need to eliminate.
Let's define what these golden nuggets actually are, because I think that term can sound a bit abstract to someone just listening.
Sure. A golden nugget is a microscopic, highly specific point of operational failure that a software engineer sitting in a comfortable, climate-controlled office would never even have the capacity to conceptualize.
Give me an example of that.
Well, an engineer looking at a spreadsheet might think the main problem in the cleaning industry is, I don't know, the payment processing software. They think it's a digital problem.
Right.
But a founder who has actually spent a month scrubbing floors realizes the real problem. The actual friction causing cleaners to quit and customers to complain might be the transit time between houses and heavy traffic.
Oh, wow.
Or it might be the sheer physical exhaustion of the workers by 3 p.m. It might be the extreme unpredictability of the chemical cleaning supplies provided by the homeowner. You cannot write an algorithm to solve a problem that you do not physically know exists.
And the source insists that this level of immersion must extend beyond just the physical labor of the provider. It demands the absolute necessity of storyboarding the entirely complete user experience.
The whole picture.
The whole picture. And we are not just talking about sketching out what the application interface looks like on an iPhone screen. You have to map out the complete physical, chronological, and emotional journey of the user.
From start to finish.
Exactly. How do they even find out about your product in the middle of their chaotic day? What is their specific emotional state when they finally arrive at your landing page? Are they frustrated? Are they rushed? What happens in their physical environment after they have utilized your service and put their phone back in their pocket?
Exactly. The software itself is just one minor, fleeting touch point in a much larger, highly complex behavioral ecosystem. If you do not meticulously storyboard the user's life, both before and after their interaction with your application, you are effectively designing a magnificent bridge that doesn't actually connect to any roads.
That's a great analogy.
You have to deeply understand the external, real-world pressures that are driving them to seek out your solution in the first place. And you must perfectly understand the exact physical resolution they expect once the digital transaction is complete.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I need to push back on this entire concept for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
This idea of becoming a cog in the machine you want to replace goes completely against the dominant narrative of the entire global tech industry. I mean, isn't the entire point of technological disruption to bring a fresh, unbiased outsider's perspective to a stagnant dinosaur industry?
That is the popular myth, yes.
Right, because if you force yourself to immerse so deeply in a broken legacy industry, if you spend months scrubbing floors the old-fashioned way, don't you run the massive psychological risk of inheriting that industry's exact blind spots?
I see where you're going with this.
To me, it sounds a bit like trying to invent the modern jet airplane by forcing yourself to spend a year shoveling coal in the engine room of a steam train. You're just learning the wrong mechanics.
What's fascinating here is that your analogy actually proves the source's point perfectly, provided we just, adjust the historical lens a fraction.
Okay, adjust it for me.
True disruption is never about ignorance of the old system. It is about absolute granular mastery of the old system's hidden frictions. Let's look at aviation, since you brought it up. The Wright brothers didn't ignore the concept of weight and gravity because they wanted to be disruptive outsiders.
Right, they had to deal with the physics.
They didn't ignore the forces that kept things grounded. They built wind tunnels to study those exact aerodynamic forces with more precision than anyone else alive at the time.
So you're saying the immersion isn't about adopting their mindset, it's about mapping their physics.
Exactly. If you are a brilliant software outsider trying to disrupt the cleaning industry, your bias will always default to software solutions.
Mm-hmm.
You will assume the problem is the scheduling UI.
Because that's what you know.
Because that's what you know. But if you actually do the grueling physical job, you map the true physics of the market. You realize the bottleneck isn't the scheduling, it's the transit logistics or supply management. By becoming the cog, you aren't adopting the legacy blind spots. You are conducting a structural stress test on the machine so you know exactly where to strike it with your new technology.
Okay, I will concede the Wright brothers' point. You have to understand gravity to defy it. But let me challenge the application of this. How do you avoid getting permanently trapped in that manual labor mindset?
That's a very real danger.
Right, because if you spend 6 months scrubbing floors to map the friction, how do you know when to stop scrubbing and actually start coding? How do you prevent the immersion from just becoming your new reality?
That is the crucial pivot point. You stop the physical immersion the exact moment the friction becomes predictable.
Predictable, okay.
When you show up to a cleaning job, and you can entirely anticipate the exact logistical failure that is going to happen before it happens, when you stop discovering new golden nuggets and start experiencing repetitive, predictable pain, you have successfully mapped the system.
You've seen the whole loop.
That is the exact moment you drop them off and pick up the keyboard. You now possess the blueprint of the enemy.
That distinction is vital for anyone listening who is trying to study a market right now.
Right.
You aren't learning the old way to copy it. You are learning the old way purely to locate the exact predictable points of structural failure.
Exactly.
And once you possess that deep, gritty, granular understanding of the problem, the next critical phase in the source material is translating that insight into an actual functional product. And you have to do this without getting lost in your own hype and without massively over-engineering a solution.
Which brings us to a term that dominates the startup ecosystem, the MVP.
The minimum viable product.
Right. Now, this is a concept that has been heavily diluted and misunderstood over the years. Many founders use it as an excuse to launch garbage.
Yeah, just ship whatever.
Exactly. But the source material strips it back to its core, brutal, scientific definition. An MVP is the absolute smallest, most reductive feature set required to solve the specific point of friction you have identified. Nothing more.
But Chung stresses a point here that I think is routinely, almost deliberately ignored by eager founders. People constantly forget the viable part of the minimum viable product.
That's the most important word.
It is, yes. It must be the absolutely smallest feature set. But the core user experience cannot be flat, and it absolutely cannot be broken. You cannot serve a customer a half-baked, raw cake, watch them grimace, and then promise them it will taste delicious in version 2.0.
That doesn't work.
The minimal features you choose to include must execute their specific narrow function flawlessly.
And this is fundamentally a matter of scientific integrity. A fundamentally broken product does not yield valid data. It only yields noise. Let's say you build a minimal app to connect cleaners and homeowners, but the payment gateway crashes half the time. If your MVP fails to deliver the core value proposition because the execution is sloppy, you are left completely blind.
Because you don't know what they're rejecting.
Precisely. When the users inevitably abandon the app, you won't know if the market rejected your brilliant underlying concept or if they simply rejected your terrible, buggy execution. Ensuring viability is what ensures that your market test is scientifically sound. It isolates the variable. You want to test the idea, not your ability to write bug-free code.
And once you have that tight, functional, viable product, communicating its value introduces another massive, surprisingly psychological trap for founders, and that is the language of positioning.
Oh, the jargon.
The jargon. Startups are deeply intoxicated by complex jargon. Everyone wants to be the Uber for X or the machine learning-driven, decentralized blockchain paradigm shift for Y.
Did a word salad.
It's a total word salad. But Chung points out a very humbling reality here. Homejoy struggled to gain any traction at all until they stripped away every single tech buzzword and utilized plain, undeniable, borderline boring language. Their positioning went from complex tech jargon to simply get your place clean for $20 an hour.
That shift in language is profound. It represents a fundamental psychological shift from founder ego to extreme customer empathy.
It's about empathy.
Completely. Jargon is almost always an ego defense mechanism. Using terms like decentralized paradigm shift makes the founder feel sophisticated, intelligent, and visionary. It strokes their own intellectual vanity. But you have to understand the reality of the consumer.
They don't care.
The consumer does not care about your grand vision. They do not care about your back-end architecture. They care exclusively about their own immediate problem.
So when a consumer sees something like Uber for X, what is actually happening in their brain?
You are forcing them to do uncompensated cognitive work.
Oh, I like that phrasing.
Right. When you say, we are the Uber for home cleaning, the consumer's brain has to stop, decode the analogy. Remember how Uber works. Translate that logistical model to the concept of home cleaning and then evaluate if that solves their problem. It is exhausting.
It's too many steps.
But the phrase, get your place clean for $20 an hour, requires absolutely zero cognitive load. It clearly states the consumer's problem. It provides the exact physical solution, and it establishes the precise financial cost, all in a single frictionless sentence. It is brutally effective because it deeply respects the user's finite time and their immediate practical needs.
So if you are listening to this right now and you are building something, look at your landing page. If you have to explain your analogy, you are losing users, period.
Absolutely.
So let's say you have a viable product that doesn't crash, and you have clear, jargon-free positioning that a child could understand. The next hurdle is actually sourcing those first few users, and the source material is incredibly emphatic on this point. Acquiring your first users is a highly manual, unglamorous, hand-to-hand combat process.
You do not run ads.
You absolutely do not buy digital ads at this stage. You do not launch massive marketing campaigns. You source them manually. It starts with the founders using the product themselves to ensure it works. Then you literally force your parents, your friends, and your coworkers to use it.
You have to beg them.
You do. And then it expands outward to highly specific online communities like the Show HN section on Hacker News and highly targeted, localized physical communities in your immediate geographic area.
And this manual sourcing is not a limitation. It is a deliberate, highly calculated strategy designed to establish the tightest possible feedback loop.
How so?
Well, when you recruit users entirely by hand, you establish a direct human line of communication. You know exactly who they are, you know the exact context in which they were recruited, and most importantly, you can monitor their interaction with your product intimately. You are absolutely not looking for scale at this moment. Scale is dangerous right now.
Scale masks the problem.
Exactly. You're looking for localized, high-resolution behavioral data.
But relying on your immediate network, your friends, your parents, your former colleagues, that introduces a profound, potentially fatal psychological danger into the data pool. And the source material defines this danger brilliantly as the honesty curve.
The honesty curve is fascinating. It's a sociological concept that maps the direct relationship between social proximity and truthful feedback.
Right.
It dictates that the closer someone is to you, either socially, professionally, or biologically, the less likely they are to ever tell you the harsh truth that your product is terrible.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the psychology of the honesty curve is so deeply ingrained in fundamental human behavior. Think about the apps on your phone right now. Think about your own daily interactions. It's essentially the classic, does this outfit look good on me, dilemma, but scaled up to dictate the survival of $1 million business model.
It's the exact same dynamic.
Let's walk through it. If you ask your mom or your best friend if your new outfit looks good, they are almost certainly going to say yes, even if it looks ridiculous. Why? Because their primary biological and social objective is to protect your feelings. They value the long-term emotional relationship far more than they value objective sartorial truth.
They don't want to hurt you.
Right, but if you walk out of your house and step onto a crowded city subway wearing that exact same outfit, a complete stranger might give you a strange look or even brutally critique you out loud. Why? Because they have zero social capital invested in your emotional well-being. They offer the cold, hard, unvarnished truth because the truth costs them nothing.
It's completely transactional for them.
So for a founder who has spent 8 months building something they love, how do they survive the severe psychological whiplash of moving from the warm, protective, polite embrace of their friends and family directly into the cold, brutal indifference of real paying customers?
This raises a profoundly important question about how founders, and really any leader trying to build a resilient system, construct their feedback mechanisms. You have to anticipate that exact psychological whiplash, and you must actively, scientifically engineer systems to mitigate the emotional bias of your inner circle.
You have to plan for the polite lies.
If you don't, your data is corrupted from day one. And a major part of this is understanding that relying solely on passive feedback is completely insufficient.
Define passive feedback for us in this context.
Passive feedback is waiting for the user to come to you. It's sending out automated digital surveys. It's waiting for anonymous App Store reviews. It's putting a Contact Us form on your website.
That sounds like standard practice, though.
It is standard practice, but it is dangerously misleading because passive feedback mechanisms naturally filter for the extreme fringes of the honesty curve. By definition, you only hear from the zealots who passionately, irrationally love the product, or the furious, highly motivated detractors who violently hate it and want to destroy you. You are getting the top 10% and the bottom 10%.
And what happens to the massive silent middle? The 80% of normal users who downloaded the app, used it once, felt somewhat indifferent or maybe slightly confused, and then just closed it.
They stay entirely silent. Actionable data. They just delete the app.
And that's your actual market.
That is your entire market. To capture the actual truth of that silent majority, which is the only data that matters for scale, Chumlin mandates a terrifying prospect for most introverted engineers. Founders must physically leave their desks and talk to these indifferent users in person.
Face to face.
Face to face. But there's a crucial psychological caveat to this process. These cannot be clinical interrogative inquisitions.
Right, you can't just corner a stranger and demand answers.
Exactly. If you sit across a coffee shop table from a user with a clipboard in your hand, firing highly technical questions at them about interface mechanics and button placement, human nature takes over. They will immediately become defensive. They will give you calculated, logical answers that they think make them sound smart.
They'll try to perform for the test.
Exactly. Most dangerously, they will politely tell you exactly what they think you want to hear so they can end the uncomfortable interaction. You learn absolutely nothing.
So how do you actually extract the truth from a stranger without triggering that polite defense mechanism?
The founder must cultivate a genuinely empathetic, wide-ranging conversation about the user's actual life. You don't start by talking about the app.
You don't even mention it.
No, you talk about their daily routines, their macro-level frustrations, and the broader context of their day.
Yeah.
If we go back to the HomeJoy example, you don't ask, did you find the scheduling button intuitive? You ask, walk me through what happened yesterday when you realized your apartment was a mess before your guests arrived. How did that make you feel? What did you do first?
You have to actively observe their natural behavior. You listen for the unprompted emotional frustrations. You extract the truth from observing their actions and their body language, not just logging their polite spoken words.
You are effectively doing high-level behavioral detective work. You are looking for the discrepancy between what they say they do and what they actually do.
Exactly.
So let's establish our exact coordinates in this deep dive. Let's summarize where the hypothetical founder is right now. You have done the grueling immersion. You have built a viable product that actually executes its core function without crashing. You have crafted simple, undeniable positioning that a child could understand. You have sourced your first 10 users manually, and you have survived the brutal reality check of the honesty curve to refine the experience based on actual human behavior.
You've survived phase 1 and 2. You have 10 solid users. The fundamental existential challenge now shifts entirely. The question becomes, how do you mathematically and strategically turn those 10 users into 100 and then 1,000 without causing the entire underlying system to collapse under its own weight?
That specific transition from early, localized adoption to systemic exponential growth is where the hard mechanics of sustainable scaling come into play. It is a shift from psychology to mathematics. And the most common fatal structural error at this precise juncture is something called premature optimization.
The rule of premature optimization is absolutely fascinating, and it is so counterintuitive to how we are taught to think about ambition.
It really is.
Because the rule dictates that you must strictly forbid yourself from building features and infrastructure for anything other than the next immediate stage of growth. If you currently have 10 users, you optimize your system to perfectly handle 100 users. You absolutely do not build the massive, complex server infrastructure designed to handle 1 million users.
You build for tomorrow, not next year.
Exactly. And the source material uses a brilliant, highly illuminating example from the early days of HomeJoy to illustrate this. When they first started, they did not build an automated, algorithmic online matching system to connect cleaners with clients.
Which is exactly what a traditional tech company would instinctively try to build first.
Exactly. Instead, they matched every single cleaner with every single client completely manually. They sat at a desk and handled the complex logistics by hand. They made the phone calls, they sent the text messages, and they did this grueling, unscalable work until they learned exactly what specific human variables and questions needed to be asked to ensure a genuinely good match.
They had to learn the variables first.
Right. Only after they perfectly understood the nuances of the human interaction did they finally codify that established process into an automated software system.
To understand why this is so critical, we have to look at the psychology of the founder again. Premature optimization is essentially a massive act of intellectual arrogance.
How so?
It operates on the assumption that you, the founder, know exactly what the future will look like and exactly how the product will need to evolve long before the market has actually provided you with the necessary behavioral data. Building massive back-end infrastructure for 1 million users when you currently only have 10 is not just a colossal waste of finite venture capital and expensive engineering hours. It creates a technical architecture that is incredibly rigid and brittle.
Explain that rigidity for us. Why is having too much infrastructure dangerous? Most people would think more infrastructure is better.
Because in a startup, your initial assumptions are almost always wrong. When the market inevitably gives you new feedback that requires a drastic 90-degree change in your product's direction, that massive, complex infrastructure you build prematurely becomes a heavy anchor.
Oh, it slows you down.
It paralyzes you. It prevents you from pivoting quickly because the engineers will say, we can't change that feature, It's deeply integrated into our million-user database architecture.
It's too expensive to tear down.
Exactly. By doing things manually in the beginning, by fiercely resisting the urge to automate until the process is perfectly understood, you maintain supreme agility. You allow the actual, verified behavior of the users to dictate the architecture of the code rather than forcing the users to conform to an architecture you just guessed at.
That is a profound principle. Doing things that don't scale is actually the prerequisite for building something that can scale.
Exactly.
So once that highly agile, validated foundation is laid, we have to look at the actual mathematics of how growth occurs. The source material breaks growth down into three very distinct mechanisms. First, we have sticky growth, which is fundamentally about user retention. Second, viral growth, which is driven by organic word of mouth, where your existing users enthusiastically recruit new users. And third, paid growth, which relies on the brute force purchasing of attention through advertising and marketing spend.
And of those three distinct mechanisms, we must be absolutely clear. Sticky growth is the absolute, non-negotiable existential baseline.
The foundation.
The foundation. Without sticky growth, the other two mechanisms are not just useless, they are actively financially destructive. Sticky growth is the mathematical proof that your product actually provides ongoing, indispensable value to a human life. It is measured primarily through two critical financial and behavioral metrics: customer lifetime value, commonly known as CLV, and cohort analysis.
Let's focus deeply on cohort analysis right now, because Shang explicitly emphasizes this as the ultimate, undeniable diagnostic tool for a company's survival.
It is the moment of truth.
If you are listening, I want you to visualize this chart in your mind because understanding it is critical. In a cohort analysis, you group your users by the specific time period they join. For example, let's say cohort A is everyone who signed up for your product in the month of March. You then track that specific group of people over time to see exactly what percentage of them continue to use the product in April, May, June, and so on.
Right, month over month.
The critical visual indicator of a structurally healthy business is that the retention curve on that graph must eventually flatten out. It must form an asymptote that runs perfectly parallel to the x-axis.
That flattening line is the pulse of the company. It proves mathematically that a core, dedicated percentage of users from that initial March cohort find the product so valuable that they will stay indefinitely. Even if 70% of the people who signed up abandon it, if that line flattens out at 30% and stays there forever, you have a viable foundation.
But if that curve does not flatten, if it continues to drop month after month and eventually hits absolute zero.
If the curve hits zero, the business is structurally, fatally flawed. It is the ultimate manifestation of the leaky bucket we discussed in the beginning.
Let's really solidify that leaky bucket analogy for the listener. Imagine you are pouring water into a bucket. The water represents your finite resources, your time, your physical effort, your venture capital, and your marketing budget. If your retention curve asymptotes at 30%, it means your bucket actually has a solid bottom. It permanently retains 30% of the immense value you pour into it.
And you can confidently build a sustainable global business on that foundation.
Exactly. But if the curve hits zero, there is a gaping hole in the bottom of the bucket. And this is the trap so many founders fall into. No matter how much water you pour into the top through massive viral marketing campaigns or incredibly expensive digital ad buys, the bucket will always inevitably empty itself out. You are just renting users, you aren't retaining them.
Which perfectly transitions us to the highly volatile mechanism of paid growth. The source material outlines very strict, unforgiving mathematical parameters for utilizing paid growth to ensure the company remains solvent. It centers entirely around the concept of the payback time.
Let's define payback time clearly. It is exactly how long it takes for a newly acquired user to generate enough net profit to cover the specific marketing cost it took to acquire them in the first place.
Precisely. It is a measure of cash flow velocity. And the rules are rigid. A payback time of 3 months or less is considered safe, highly sustainable, and aggressively scalable.
3 months is the safe zone.
Yes. Pushing that payback period out to 12 months is considered risk-loving. You are walking on the edge of a cliff. Pushing the payback period beyond 12 months enters the absolute danger zone, a mathematical trajectory that almost inevitably leads to systemic bankruptcy.
Let's actually do the math out loud for the listener to explain why that timeline is so critical. Let's create a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you spend $50 on Facebook ads to acquire one single user. We will call that your customer acquisition cost, or ACC. Now, let's say that user generates $20 a month in net profit for your business. In this scenario, it will take exactly 2.5 months of them using the product for you to earn back that initial $50. You are made whole in 2.5 months. That fits safely inside the 3-month rule. That is sustainable.
It is sustainable because the capital cycle is rapid. In that scenario, your $50 comes back to you in 75 days, and you can immediately deploy that exact same $50 to acquire the next user.
Right.
But now let's alter the math to illustrate the danger zone. Let's say your customer acquisition cost skyrockets to $360 because the ad market gets crowded, but the user is still only giving you $20 a month in profit.
Okay. 360 divided by $20 a month, that is an 18-month payback period. You are deep in the danger zone.
The logic of the danger zone is utterly unforgiving. If your payback period is 18 months, you are tying up your limited capital for a year and a half before you even break even on a single user. You are operating at a massive deficit.
And a lot can happen in a year and a half.
In the highly volatile, unpredictable ecosystem of a startup or, frankly, the global economy, 18 months is a terrifying eternity. Think about what can happen in 18 months. Macroeconomic conditions change. A massive new competitor emerges with a cheaper product. Inflation drives up your server costs. The ad platform changes its algorithm.
It's just too much exposure.
Exactly. If you have an 18-month payback period, you are operating on immense leverage and blind hope, gambling that the user's behavior and the global economy will remain perfectly static for over a year just so you can break even. It is a recipe for collapse. A 3-month payback period acts as a shock absorber against market volatility.
But looking at the sequence of these growth types, I have to challenge this framework.
Go ahead.
If we firmly establish that sticky growth, the flat line of the cohort analysis, is the ultimate undeniable existential indicator of a company's survival, shouldn't founders absolutely forbid themselves from spending a single dime on paid growth until they have mathematically proven their retention curve is perfectly flat? I mean, why even touch the dangerous tool of paid growth if your bucket still has a potential leak in it? Isn't that just pouring expensive water onto the floor?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of data gathering, we see that the relationship between sticky growth and paid growth isn't necessarily strictly sequential. No, you don't always finish one before starting the other. The relationship can be highly diagnostic. You are correct that relying on paid growth to scale a leaky bucket is suicidal. However, strategic, highly disciplined, tightly controlled paid growth, kept strictly within that safe 3-month payback window, can act as a targeted diagnostic laser.
A diagnostic laser. Explain how that works in practice.
When you first launch, your organic, viral growth is entirely driven by early adopters. These are your friends, your network, and tech enthusiasts. They are highly forgiving and deeply biased.
We're on the warm end of the honesty curve.
Exactly. If you only rely on organic word of mouth early on, your cohort analysis data might be artificially skewed by their enthusiasm. You might think your retention curve is flat, but it's only flat because your mom and her friends are using it. By utilizing a very small, strictly controlled budget for paid growth, you can reach outside your warm network. You can acquire a purely cold, unbiased cohort of users from a different demographic and measure exactly how they behave over time.
So you're not paying for growth, you're paying for objective data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are paying to access the cold, brutal end of the honesty curve. The structural danger is not the concept of paid growth itself. The profound danger is using massive amounts of venture capital on paid growth to artificially inflate your top-line registration numbers to impress investors, while simultaneously desperately masking a fatal retention problem underneath.
Which is basically fraud.
That is fraud by metric. Cohort analysis acts as the ultimate, unyielding lie detector test for a startup's actual value. It strips away the vanity metrics of total downloads or daily page views and exposes the cold, unvarnished truth of whether or not the product is actually indispensable to a human life.
Understanding these interconnected metrics gives a founder or a CEO a highly calibrated, mathematically sound dashboard for their business. You understand your customer lifetime value, you monitor your payback periods religiously, and you obsess over your asymptoting retention curves. But this brings us to the most difficult phase of the journey. What happens when the math breaks down?
The dreaded stall.
What happens when you execute perfectly? You do the manual labor, you talk empathetically to the users, you iterate the code rapidly, and despite all of your grueling, optimized effort, that cohort retention curve still slowly, agonizingly bleeds out to zero.
That is the moment of maximum crushing psychological pressure for any leader. It is the exact moment where the intoxicating fantasy of the startup growth curve violently collides with unforgiving reality.
We all know the fantasy curve. It's the chart every founder puts in their pitch deck. It is the beautifully smooth exponential line sweeping upward and to the right. One user becomes two, two become four, four become a million.
Up and to the right, always.
But Chung pulls back the curtain on the actual lived reality of building a company. The real trajectory is incredibly jagged. It is chaotic. It is filled with terrifying, unpredictable dips, agonizing multi-month plateaus where nothing works, and moments where the entire system seems to stall completely. And navigating that jagged, brutal reality requires mastering what is arguably the most difficult skill in business, the art of the pivot.
The term pivot has been heavily corrupted in modern business culture.
It really has. People throw it around constantly.
They do. It is often used casually as a euphemism for outright failure, or worse, as a convenient excuse for an undisciplined founder to jump from one shiny idea to another the moment things get difficult. But Chung defines the criteria for a legitimate, necessary pivot with extreme mathematical sharpness. A true pivot is never a whim. It is a highly calculated strategic maneuver triggered by very specific, undeniable data conditions.
And the criteria she lays out is stark, and it leaves absolutely no room for ego. She states, if you are executing relentlessly, if you are out there manually talking to users every day, if you are actively tweaking the product based on real observed feedback, and despite all of that optimized, grueling effort, you experience 3 to 4 consecutive weeks of zero or backward growth, you are fundamentally doing something wrong. The market is actively rejecting your core premise.
Now, to a layman, 3 to 4 weeks might sound like an incredibly short period of time to make a massive structural decision.
It sounds like a panic button.
Right. But we have to remember the context. In the compressed, hyper-accelerated timeline of an early-stage venture, where capital is burning every single day, a month of zero growth despite active iteration is an eternity. It is a definitive, screaming signal from the market. But it is crucial to understand what a pivot actually entails in this framework. A pivot isn't necessarily abandoning the entire company, firing your engineering team, and starting from scratch in a completely different industry.
Right, you aren't shutting down a cleaning company to start a crypto exchange.
Exactly. A proper pivot is specifically abandoning a single, fundamentally flawed underlying assumption that the market has definitively rejected, while carefully retaining the valuable assets you have built. Your team's cohesion, your existing code base, and the deep, granular market knowledge you have accumulated during your immersion phase. You're changing the angle of attack, not the war itself.
So what does this all practically mean for the founder who is currently in the trenches? Because the psychological toll of making that decision must be immense. It sounds like playing a game of high-stakes chicken with the global market.
It is incredibly stressful.
How does a human being actually differentiate between the dip, which is the natural, agonizing, but necessary friction of building something genuinely new, and a fundamental structural failure that requires a hard pivot? Is that monumental decision purely mathematical, driven coldly by the 3-week data rule, or is it an intuitive gut realization?
Is the absolute seamless intersection of objective data and deeply earned intuition, and one absolutely cannot function effectively without the other. Let me explain how they interact.
Please do.
The math, those 3 to 4 agonizing weeks of flatline or negative cohort growth, that provides the hard, objective trigger. It is the fire alarm. It tells you unequivocally you must move. But the data cannot tell you where to move. The profound intuition required to know how to pivot and exactly what new hypothesis to test is entirely built during phase 1 and phase 2 of this exact process.
Case immersion and the user interviews.
Precisely. That intuition is built by doing the grueling manual work of becoming a cog in the machine, and by facing your users at the far cold end of the honesty curve. If a founder has hidden in a dark room writing code, if they haven't been scrubbing the physical floors or conducting those empathetic behavioral interviews, a pivot is nothing more than a blind, desperate guess.
They're just flailing.
Exactly. They hear the fire alarm, but they have no map of the building. They are just throwing darts in the dark, hoping to hit a business model.
Yeah.
But if they have been deeply immersed as a cog, the data simply tells them their current assumption is dead. And their deep, intuitive, physical mastery of the market's friction naturally points them toward the next viable hypothesis.
It's the ultimate synthesis of the microscopic human interaction and the macroscopic mathematical data.
It is. And if we elevate this entire framework and extrapolate this specific mechanic to the broader global economy, we see the exact same pattern playing out on a massive international scale.
Oh,
Look at the legacy corporations that survive for decades. Look at the massive institutions that managed to weather profound technological and geopolitical revolutions. They are essentially running a continuous, highly disciplined, low-grade pivot at all times. They are locked in a permanent state of unrelenting user feedback, constantly abandoning micro-assumptions as the global market shifts beneath them. The startups, and frankly the empires that fail, are simply the ones whose core assumptions are too rigid to survive contact with reality.
That brings us to a crucial synthesis of everything we've unpacked today from Adora Chung's incredibly dense Y Combinator masterclass. The prevailing mythology of Silicon Valley growth, the story we are fed by movies and magazines, is built on the idolization of the lone genius, the magical algorithmic hack, or the perfectly timed, explosive viral PR stunt.
It's a very seductive story.
It is. But as we've explored today, the mechanical reality of building a sustainable system is starkly different. Genuine, sustainable growth is a deeply unglamorous, highly manual, and emotionally taxing process. It is forged not in a vacuum, but in the fires of operational empathy. It requires the profound humility to willingly become a lowly cog in a broken machine before you ever attempt to replace it. It demands the psychological courage to face uncomfortable, brutal honesty from strangers. And it requires a rigorous, almost ruthless mathematical discipline to measure your own survival.
It is fundamentally an architectural challenge, not a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
You build the foundation manually, by hand, you test the psychological materials through extreme stress,
Okay.
and you only scale the massive infrastructure when the unforgiving mathematics of human behavior unequivocally demand it.
And that leaves us with a lingering, intense idea to consider long after this deep dive is over. We have firmly established today that the most valuable, structurally necessary, and world-changing feedback a founder can ever receive comes from the far, cold end of the honesty curve.
From the strangers.
It comes from total strangers who owe you nothing, who have absolutely zero social capital invested in your ego, and who will deliver the brutal, unvarnished truth about your failures. But take a moment to look at the modern digital landscape that we all inhabit today.
Right.
We exist almost entirely within highly curated algorithmic echo chambers. These digital environments are meticulously mathematically designed to the world's largest companies to show us exactly what we want to see, to constantly reinforce our existing biases, and to artificially validate our deepest assumptions. They effectively trap our entire society at the useless, polite, emotionally safe end of the honesty curve. So the question we must ask ourselves is this. If a single startup inevitably dies when it only listens to polite lies, what happens to a global culture that is structurally engineered to do the exact same thing?